welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're new around here, then my name's Katie. I'm a mixed media artist, and in today's video I'm going to be sharing my process for painting some pumpkins in my sketchbook, and I thought I would talk you through the process and share how I painted them so you can paint along with me too. So I'm using my A4 Royal Talon sketchbook, so that's 21 by 30 centimeters, and I'm also using acrylic ink. I really love using acrylic ink because of its vibrancy, and I really recommend it for painting these pumpkins. If you don't have acrylic ink, you could also use acrylic paint. Both just give a real vibrancy, and I just really love working with it, especially ink, simply because it's a lot runnier than actual paint, so I find it quite fun to mix, and I really enjoy blending with it, which you'll see that I play with later in this video. So personally, I don't tend to sketch first, so I'm just going straight in with my colours. I have also got some white gouache, simply because I didn't have any white acrylic paint nearby. So I also mix that in just to make it a little bit more pastel for some of the highlights. Now this is where I found it really fun, because you can apply the acrylic ink straight onto the page using the stopper. So usually they come with pipettes, and I just really loved playing with this technique. The pumpkins have loads of texture, and that's what I was really trying to achieve with this. So you can see I'm applying it straight to the page. It's really not a problem if it goes, like, if there's too much ink on the pipette, because I think that's where a lot of the fun comes in. You have to kind of let go of perfection with this one, because the ink will do its own thing. You can try and guide it, but I think a lot of the fun with this technique and with art in general is just playing and really embracing that creativity and having fun in your sketchbook. That's what they're there for, and I definitely think this ticks those boxes. So as you can see, I've started with my base layer and I'm working pumpkin by pumpkin. You can find references either online from copyright-free sites, but for me I took these photos, so I will leave a few on screen now so you can screenshot this, and you're welcome to use these for your artwork as well. I start with my base shape and my main colours. Like I said, I don't sketch, I just use the brush to find the shape. Once I've put down the acrylic ink base, or if you're using paint, then I'll come in with the green just to mark out some of the darker areas to make some of those lines. So this one was fun because I was applying some of the acrylic ink straight to the page. I am using my tear off paint palette sheet, which you can see to the side, but it's also fun to just put the ink straight on, and that creates a really nice texture as well because it doesn't have to blend perfectly. I'm only using 3 colours here, so I will link everything down below, but I'm using a green, a red and a yellow, and then obviously I also have got my white gouache, which I am mixing in some places. Mostly I'm putting the green straight on with the pipette and adding that on top. The acrylic ink does dry really fast, and so does acrylic paint. You've got to be quite quick when you are putting on other layers, but because they are going on quite thickly, it doesn't dry instantly. So you've still got a bit of time, but I definitely recommend going in quite fast after you've put down that first layer, and that's the main reason why I'm doing it pumpkin by pumpkin instead of doing the first layer and then coming back with the green. I'm using a size 10 brush just to neaten up some of the shape, just to define some of the edges a little bit more. Now this one down at the bottom was really fun, so I really wanted to go all in with my texture. I'm being quite loose with my brush, I'm adding on the acrylic ink and then mixing that onto the page, into the orange, just to create multiple shades. And again, coming in with my green, dabbing that with the brush. We're really trying to emphasize the texture, and this one was really knobbly and bobbly, and so I was really enjoying this one. When I mix my paintbrush with water, obviously it dilutes what's on my brush, so I come back in onto the page and just really have fun. Use your brush to create some of these marks and then just go with what comes out on your page. I was kind of looking at the references less and less at this point because it depended on what came out on the page with the shapes, and I worked around that. So you can use the references as a starting point, which is usually how I use them, and then I add to it depending on the shape and the colours that are on my page. So I'm just adding on some green areas, not necessarily based on the reference, if that makes sense. I'm also creating kind of scratchy marks with the end of the pipette. You can also do this with like the end of a paintbrush or a stick. That's always really fun to try, and so you're not limited with your materials. You can really use whatever you have to hand. The next one I'm doing is a lighter colour, which is where the white comes in, and I've mixed that with a bit of the yellow. And then coming in with the green, when I mixed that in, it was quite lurid, so I did add a little bit of the yellow and red, just to create a slightly different and more natural shade. I'm alternating between the pipette and the brush, and I don't have a set method, I'm kind of just playing around. I didn't have a plan when it came to this spread. You can definitely tell I was just having fun and seeing what worked. And I think that's the joy of sketchbooks, like I mentioned before. I'm a huge believer in sketchbooks and just going with what you feel like. I tend to change my subjects up a lot, I tend to just go with what I fancy. That's where most of my joy with art comes in, is just creating whatever I feel like that day. For this one it was pumpkins, inspired by my trip where I went to a kitchen garden to take these pictures of the pumpkins, and I just love the colours, so this is what I fancy doing. And if you want to join me, then I would love to see. Please do tag me on Instagram if you do, and if you are referencing this video. So the next one is another lumpy bumpy pumpkin. Again, I'm putting on lots of different shades. I'm not trying to create really smooth blending. You can see that there are spaces of the page coming through, and that's totally fine. I'm not mixing it in really well. I really like the way that some of the orange is coming in, some of the white, and I'm really trying to keep that looking really organic and natural, because there are so many different surfaces to this pumpkin. I don't want it to be a really flat, smooth colour, because it's not a flat shape. So you can see here I'm about to mix up a brown, so I'm still using the colours that I have. I'm adding in some red with the green, which creates the brown shade I want for the stalks of each of the pumpkins. Again, I'm not really looking at the references because I wanted it to work with the layout of my page. So where I've put down like that shape above, I want to kind of just fit it in around the pumpkins I've already got. If you want a lighter brown, you can add in your white, and if you want a warmer, redder brown, then you can obviously add in more red. So again, I'm trying not to be too precise, I'm just using my brush to create these organic shapes. And again, not blending in everything, I'm keeping the texture from the brush, and I'm keeping in the different colours because I don't want it to be a super smooth colour. For this bit of the painting, I am going around and doing them all together in one go because I have mixed up that brown on my brush, and I didn't do this earlier because I wanted to keep the yellows and the oranges of the pumpkins quite clean. I really enjoy adding swatches to my page, so this is something you can add to your spread as well, and I'm just using the colours I had on my palette just to add that in the top corner. So now that's the wet layer done, and it's time to add on my coloured pencils. I'm using mostly Luminance here and picking out a few red, orange and green shades. Sometimes acrylic ink can go a little bit glossy, but mostly that's only where it's really thick, so that's just something to be aware of. But I do find Luminance goes over really nicely. It's a really vibrant and hard lead, so I didn't have any issues, especially on the yellows and oranges where I've mixed it in. Some of the greens, especially where it was on quite thickly, it did struggle, so I just worked around that. And I also do come in with some Neocolor pastels later, which doesn't have any issue going over it. So again, I'm trying to build up some texture, and I'm also using a dark green. I will put the shades down in the description box below. Although we did use the green for adding on most of the stripes, I did want to define them a little bit more, which is why I'm coming in with my pencil now. I can just add on a bit more texture and have a little bit more control, but I am being quite scratchy with my marks. I'm not trying to be super defined or smooth with it. I'm trying to create wobbly lines and little dots just to mimic what I can see on the pumpkins. On the bobbly ones, I'm also adding on circles just to highlight that there's like warts on this pumpkin. This one's called a warty goblin. So I'm just adding that on, and again, using really scratchy, not smooth lines just to again highlight the texture. You can go around and you can add on an outline around the whole pumpkin, but for me I'm just doing it on some of the areas because that's my style and I don't want to outline the whole thing. I'm using a mix of my colours here, so I sometimes go in with my red, then I'll swap back to the yellow. If you've seen my process before, you'll know that it definitely is quite erratic with my materials. I'll come in with my Neocolor and then I'll come back with my pencils. I'll use the green, then I'll use the yellow and come back to the green. It basically depends on what I want to add to that area at the time. So don't feel like you have to do a set formula, because it kind of just depends on what you fancy. Your pumpkins are going to look quite different to mine because it's such an organic process and it's an organic fruit. So it makes sense that yours will be different depending on how your texture's gone down, depending on the mediums you're using. So just embrace that and have fun and just try and build up that texture and enjoy the process. So you can build it up slowly depending on how many oranges you have. You could start with yellower ones and then build up to more red ones. Or you can do what I do, where I'm just sort of scribbling on a few tones. I think I used maybe 3 or 4 red and orange tones and then this one darker green. And a lighter green for the whiter pumpkins. Here's that yellow Neocolor I was mentioning. I did end up snapping my yellow, so I was being quite heavy-handed. That's generally my style in terms of being quite harsh with my lines, but you can use the side of the pencil, which you can see I'm doing here, mostly on the lighter pumpkins, just to again add on another layer of texture. We're really building it up by adding on more and more. You can also define the stripes a little bit, which is what I'm doing here, and just working with what you have there. I didn't have any issues with this one going over the green because I had mixed it in with a bit of yellow, but you can really see some of the textures coming into play where I had water on my brush and allowed it to seep into the other wet colours on the page. This is where I'm coming in with that really light green, which I really enjoy using. And then coming in onto the last pumpkin where I'm adding on more circles and bubbles onto the texture of this pumpkin, because this was another one with lots of lumpy areas. And these were definitely my favourite ones to draw. I really had fun with this subject, and it's not actually something that I've drawn before. It feels really seasonal for this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere. And I was just really inspired by seeing them in the kitchen garden, seeing how vibrant they were, and having a play with my acrylic inks, which I haven't used in quite a long time. It's one of those mediums where I'll use it and really enjoy it and then put it back in the drawer and then go back to my other mediums, because as a mixed media artist I'm constantly moving around and working out what I want to use that day, so it's not like I'm just using one thing. I tend to just, like with my subjects, just pick what I fancy, and it also depends on what I'm drawing. If I want to do something really vibrant, then I can pick out my acrylics, and that's what I went for today. For the stalks of the pumpkins, you'll just want a brown pencil. I'm using a Derwent drawing one here because I don't have very many brown shades in my luminance, but whatever pencil you have is fine, and you just want to draw on some lines onto that stalk. I'm also adding in a bit of green for some of them and a like olivey green on others. Mostly I'm using that one brown for the darker lines, and that ties it all in together, and I just really like the way that this looks. Again, it kind of ties in with the texture that we've put on the base of the pumpkin, and you just want to follow the shape of the stem that you've already put down and just draw some lines. They don't have to be very neat at all. You can overlap them and follow the shape that you've put down with your paintbrush. So once that was done, I did come in a little bit with a dark indigo just for really darker areas that I wanted to add, and then came in with my annotation. So I used a sort of burgundy shade, and I don't know how accurate this is. I just kind of googled some names of these pumpkins, so they might not be a perfect match to the pumpkins I've drawn, but I really loved adding this on. I really enjoy doing hand-drawn typography and adding them onto the page because it did feel a little bit empty. So if you don't feel super confident with your hand lettering, you can just use your handwriting, or you can add them on afterwards with like a photo editing software, depending on what you feel like. So I'm going to leave it there with my voiceover, but I really hope you enjoyed watching this one, and like I said, if you did follow along with my process, I would really love to see your artwork. I had so much fun with this subject and really enjoyed sharing the process with you. So a huge thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely week ahead. I will see you next Sunday with a new YouTube video. See you later.